Ariski Dode here, and Happy New Year to you all. Today, let me talk to you about a region called the Sahel region and how it ended in 2023 and what we should expect 2024 to look like. Now, firstly, let me say that Christmas in Africa this year has been gloomy to say the least. It was not so much to cheer for. The political, economic, social, and security environments in many African nations have been experiencing the worst case scenario, so much so that 2024 is likely to bring once again more bad news for millions of people. While the end of the COVID-19 pandemic brought hope of a return to some normalcy and paved the way for recovery, economic woes, violence, a degraded environment, and political leaders unable to solve problems were compounded by the impacts from the wars in Ukraine and now more recently in the Middle East, making the lives of millions of people miserable, and the outlook does not bode well. Now, as we enter 2024, we see that Africa continues to be ravaged by persistent zones of armed conflict. Troubles are everywhere, from the DR Congo with its recent chaotic presidential election held on the 20th of December, to Sudan, to Mozambique, and so many other places. Of course, the Sahel is where all these problems seem to pile up at once. So what are the latest developments in the Sahel that could point as to how 2024 could evolve? First, let's go to northern Mali, where Tuareg militants seeking autonomy from the central government based in the southern city of Bamako announced on December the 20th that they had established a blockade on the main roads in northern Mali, where the Malian army has regained a foothold in recent weeks. While the Malian military has launched an offensive in November to regain control of the region of Kidal, the Tuaregs want to disrupt any return to normalcy under the rule of the central government. Their blockade means that the Tuaregs would have a say on the movement of people, cargo, and merchandise. Now, because the blockaded zone includes the towns of Menaka, Kidal, Gao, Timbuktu, and Taoudeni, expanding all the way to the border with Algeria, this decision is likely to affect people's movements and trade, not only throughout the large swaths of Malian territory, but also inside Mauritania and Niger, two neighboring countries to the east and the west. Now, the retaking of Kidal by the Malian military was marred with accusations of abuse and mistreatment of civilian populations by soldiers of the Malian army. Mali also allegedly benefited from the support of the Wagner group. Meanwhile, the Malian government is also dealing with a second front against the jihadi militants of the Support Group of Islam and Muslims affiliated with Al-Qaeda, who have been wreaking havoc in the troubled country. On December the 14th, the army reported an attack in Farabougou, in the center of the country. While it said it managed to repel the attackers, dozens of Malian soldiers and civilians were said to have been killed in the fight. The total death toll was not released by the government, but media sources say it could be as high as 62. Several people, including army officers and soldiers, were kidnapped by the fleeing assailants. In nearby Niger to the east and Burkina Faso to the south of Mali, the latest developments focused on the two countries distancing themselves from the influence of the former colonial power, France. One man in particular in France's foreign affairs circle stands out as the personification of France's inability to maintain its presence in the Sahel and elsewhere in Africa. His name, Jean-Yves Le Drian, former Minister of Defense and then former Minister of Foreign Affairs. He has been criticized by French analysts and the media for having focused almost exclusively on the military solutions to problems that require more nuanced and multifaceted approaches to Africa's problems. As 2023 ended, the capital of Niger, Niamey, found itself without a French embassy, a situation that never happened in the past. The French embassy in Niamey is now permanently closed thanks to the misguided positions of the hawks in Paris who favor military solutions to diplomatic, economic, and development assistance. Emphasizing the drop in the level of cooperation between Paris and Niamey, France has decided to close its embassy in Niger, arguing that, and I'm quoting, it is no longer able to function normally and to carry out its missions, end of quote, shortly after Niger announced the departure of all French soldiers deployed in the country. Over the past summer, the authorities in Niger had ordered the French ambassador, Sylvain Ité, to leave, a move that resulted, obviously, in a diplomatic feud with Paris. Now, as France is forced to retract, Russia makes its position clearer as to its intentions on the continent. As 2024 progresses, Russia's goal is to clearly undermine the West's influence in Africa by providing military assistance to countries that otherwise would have never gathered any support from the West. There are also observers and commentators who argue that Russia is actively engaged in fostering instability, disrupting elections, exporting arms, and potentially fueling migration movements, all in an effort to destabilize Europe. True or not, this strategy is still a conceivable one. There's also the fact that Russia could benefit from Africa's mineral wealth and natural resources to circumvent Western efforts to blockade its economy. The country needs all sorts of things: manganese, bauxite, chrome, and so many other commodities that would be used to fuel its industry, in particular its defense industry. And what does Russia have to offer? Well, security contracts, just the one it just inked with Niger. Russia also considers African nations as potential diplomatic allies that can strengthen its positions in places like the United Nations, for example. In Burkina Faso, anti-French sentiment led to the transitional regime of Ibrahim Traoré to announce a new bill revising the constitution, hence replacing the French language with local languages as official languages. Several anti-French lobby groups staged demonstrations demanding constitutional reform that they say must enshrine political, economic, and cultural sovereignty, with the country distancing itself from France. The Burkinabe discontent with France runs deep. French magazine Jeune Afrique recently reported that 4 agents of the French spy agency, the Directorate General of External Security, or DGSE, were arrested in early December 2023 in Ouagadougou. The agents were essentially held and questioned at first for about 10 days before they were ordered incarceration at the main prison in Ouagadougou. Burkina is accusing the group of espionage as talks between the two countries are underway with the help of third-party mediators to ease the tension. Here, too, observers see the hands of Russia, which has lately become an easy target for the French and Western press, accusing it of being an instigator of trouble in the Sahel. Now, in contrast to the French withdrawing diplomatically, the Russians are in. This is the case of Burkina Faso with the December 28, 2023 reopening of the Russian embassy, which closed in 1992. The reopening, in fact, coincided with the announcement that 25,000 tons of wheat were headed from Russia to Burkina Faso as humanitarian aid from Moscow, which shortlisted 5 other countries in addition to Burkina Faso to get cereals at no cost for the destination country. Now, Jeune Afrique magazine notes that its sources reported that Russian nationals, probably agents of the Russian military intelligence GRU, have been working in Burkina Faso to help the junta reorganize its security services. Obviously, we cannot verify this information. However, this may not be completely out of the ordinary. Sahelian nations that have turned their back to France are likely looking for support from other military powers, and Russia could be probably the right candidate. So as we look at 2024, should we be concerned about the Sahel and its peoples? Absolutely. The fundamentals of stability are not there. And while most analysts worry about the impact of Russia in the region, we should be more concerned about the French undermining any progress in the region after the humiliating exit of its troops and its diplomats. The main issue here is that France is likely to launch a campaign to potentially block any efforts made by the military junta in the Sahel. And the reality, true reality, is that Paris knows the region very well, probably better than any other nation. It has the knowledge, the networks, it has the relationships, it has been controlling all aspects of the local economies. It prints the money in Paris. It holds the Sahel nation's currency reserves. It has historical ties no other Western nation can match. Compared to Russia's knowledge of and interaction with the Sahel, France is a giant, dwarfing Russia many, many times. France is also home to hundreds of thousands of people from the Sahel. And so the factors that tie the Sahel to France are much stronger than in any other country. France has what it takes to make or break the Sahel. And so rather than worry about Russia per se, my number one concern is France's future actions there, overt or covert, in the Sahel. However, is there a silver lining or sort of a light at the end of the tunnel for the Sahel region? Possibly. My feeling is that before the most recent coups that have toppled the previous regimes in Niger, Mali, Burkina, and Guinea, there was clearly a sense of gloom and doom. The ousted regimes were essentially proxies of France, a continuation of the immediate post-colonial era that never saw these nations reach real sovereignty. As such, there was no real domestic stakeholders in the Sahel who are or were concerned about economic and social development, security, social stability, etc. All you had were regimes that focus on their own survival and their gathering wealth with little to no concern about the fate of the Sahelian populations. That allowed the security climate to deteriorate drastically with the arrival of outside forces such as terror groups operating without being bothered. That allowed communal relations to worsen and tens of thousands of people killed with fights between herders and farmers or between various ethnic groups, for example. The country's environmental and climate degradation accelerated at no one really cared. Although, and for the record, I never, ever endorse military regimes. I will not endorse these juntas in power in Sahel. It's possible, though, that the fact that Burkina, Mali, and Niger are inward-looking, even with the presence of the Russian operatives there, that could be the silver lining. Junta leaders, love them or hate them, see no value in the post-colonial status quo and are talking to each other to potentially form new institutions created organically, not with the mandate from Western Europe. They have already left the ineffective G5 regional force that was engineered by France and have created a three-country coalition that brings together their defense forces. Next, I predict that this year, that is 2024, they will also leave the West African Economic and Monetary Union and ditch the franc CFA to adopt a Sahelian currency. I'm assuming that Russia will make its services available to print their money when they are ready to move to that next phase. There are also many forces and lobby groups within the Sahel who are pushing for the three countries to withdraw from the West African grouping called ECOWAS after the latter threatened military intervention to bring back the toppled ex-Niger president, Mohamed Bazoum. Such threats were only possible because France pressured ECOWAS to do so. Exiting ECOWAS would be an extraordinary step. but still marginally possible. So these governing juntas have a lot to deal with in 2024, and the process will be extremely painful. But then again, what options do they have? Return to the old post-colonial freeze? Thank you for listening. Until our next talk, goodbye and Happy New Year again.